Caswell. Today I'll be discussing pandemics and resilient city designs. Before we get started, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge that the Stalo occupied the land on which I currently reside long before Canada was formed. I recognize and acknowledge that I live, work, and learn on the traditional unceded territory of the Stalo Nation. I honor the contribution that they have made and continue to make in my community. I'm going to discuss how pandemics have impacted city design through the centuries and the messaging that resonates in our public spaces as a result. The coronavirus is not the first pandemic in human history to impact our cities. Pandemics have been affecting our cities for thousands of years, and each time it forces humans to rethink city design and become more innovative in how we alter the built form to be more resilient going forward. This is not an exhaustive list of all the pandemics that have affected architecture and city planning, but I wanted to provide a visual to show that our cities and our approach to design are transforming all the time, and disease in particular is a major driving factor for altering how we live and function in our communities. By looking at the anthropological evidence, humans use epidemiological information to plan and evaluate strategies that have resulted in the evolution of our urban landscapes. If we examine how disease has shaped our communities, we can see a trend of more innovative planning and infrastructure post-pandemic. For example, the ancient Romans saw an increased need for cleanliness after the bubonic plagues. So aqueducts were incorporated into city design to bring clean water to cities that were more inland and had restricted access to fresh water sources. When the Black Death and Yellow Fever came into play, that brought about more advanced sanitation systems and garden cities. And they also started to expand their borders to allow for increased local agriculture that provided a sustainable supply of food. When tuberculosis, typhoid, polio, and the Spanish flus, for example, all came into the picture, this triggered policy changes that enacted slum clearances. We see waste management system coming into play. Even larger living spaces started to be incorporated into multifamily dwellings. And these types of diseases showed us that we need to design cities with healthier living conditions, more green and larger public spaces. And we start to see single-use zoning coming into effect, which essentially started to separate residential areas from the industrial ones. So in the post-pandemic world, humans have been able to look at history, look at the past pandemics, and evaluate what is and isn't working. And by identifying the areas that aren't working for us, we can alter the built form to be more resilient in the future. With the current coronavirus outbreak, we as a society have realized that there are still planning practices that just aren't working for us, making our cities less resilient to the impacts of disease. With populations growing larger and larger, cities have been reverting to old habits. We all know that real estate is a precious commodity, especially in urban areas. So maximizing land use has become a normal practice, but it's resulting in overcrowding and smaller spaces. Our public spaces have therefore been put on the back burner for some time now, and we started seeing less and less green space incorporated into the foundational infrastructure of cities across the world. Think about your own community for a minute. What do you see when you look around your neighborhood and the surrounding landscape? I bet you see a lot of stacked townhomes and condominiums that are really starting to just make spaces smaller and smaller. These spaces often have poor ventilation, inoperable windows, small balconies and common spaces. And if we look beyond just living space, we see other practices working against us. Take pedestrians, for example. They're competing for space against bikes and traffic and parking lots. Essentially, we are living in a paved paradise. Here are a few visuals of how Vancouver has changed over the past 100 years. If we look closely, not only can we see how the city has evolved over time, but it also tells us how quick humans are to forget what is needed to make our cities resilient. Just looking at the photo from 1920 compared to the photo from 2020, we can see we went from having space between buildings, lots of greenery, you can really see the ocean from here. And then we look at the picture in 2020, and what do we see? We see skyscraper after skyscraper stacked closely to each other, very little green space, and you can't really see the ocean from here. It's taken away all of the natural beauty of our city. So our city designs have been reverting, and we aren't thinking of how to make them resilient anymore. The focus has shifted to how can we fit a large population into a small square footage. Now, just think about that for a moment. What kind of message is being sent to citizens and communities in these cities? Resiliency and healthy living isn't really a part of the picture here, is it? So what do we do about it? Well, planning departments need to be more diverse in the cities that they're designing. Unfortunately, our current planning methods have created structural inequalities. And one example of this is one that I think many of us can relate to. There is a large disconnect between housing costs and income. However, COVID-19 has brought some of these inequalities to the forefront, and this is encouraging citizens to engage in the informed planning process, which is known as insurgency planning. So citizens are helping urban planners to design our cities in a way that is equitable and community-based. Now, maybe this isn't going to necessarily fix the housing and income problem, but it can address other areas of inequalities that can improve the overall quality of life for the community as a whole. Our cities are starting to respond to the crisis by implementing several recovery strategies, such as reviewing our urban mobility. Citizens and local businesses are participating in creative design strategies, such as outdoor patios that are popping up everywhere. We see streets being closed for pedestrian use and to accommodate events like local farmers markets, for example. But it's also encouraged communities to consider sustainable food supply as another area of priority. Many people have started their own gardens over the past year, and cities are working to change policies to allow more local farming to take place, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on. We're also seeing a need for digital inclusion. This has been a big barrier, and we're working to find new ways all the time of altering our online platforms so that we can run our businesses through social media, seeing better education platforms and video conferencing software come into play. And these are all ways that the community as a whole is able to stay connected during a time of crisis where we're not able to physically be together. But in addition to this, the coronavirus has also really brought up the need for urban parks and public spaces to become a priority. And cities are starting to really look at this and invest more time and money into these areas. Outdoor recreation is really being taken advantage of right now. And hopefully this is a trend that will continue into the post-pandemic world. But overall, the COVID-19 has really brought about the need to do a complete review of risk management and tactical urbanism strategies that are focused on public safety in the community. One method, or shall I say concept, that is becoming popular is the 20-minute city. This concept would create an inclusive, effective, and more livable community that provides residents with jobs, essential services, access to food, more green spaces, education, affordable housing, even alternative methods of transport, just to name a few. But all of these would be within a 20-minute radius of your home. So it's a really, really interesting concept. And it is one that cities are really starting to take more seriously as we move into the post-pandemic world here. But in order to really begin creating resilient cities, we need to understand the needs of the community first. And we can do this through a tactical urbanism strategy called design thinking. Incorporating this into urban design planning offers citizens a chance to be a part of the design process, leaving a powerful message that the city is being created by the residents, not for them. So essentially, this becomes a more inclusive process. It also allows the city to offer remedial strategies to address areas of concern, such as social inequalities and marginalization within a particular community. The city of Abbotsford is doing just that. Agriculture is a major part of this community's identity and economy. However, many farmers are struggling to work within the strict policies and bylaws that are in place with the ALR and ARC. So the city of Abbotsford is working on a three-part initiative that is focused on updating the current bylaws, policies, and regulations around agricultural land use in an effort to encourage growth in this industry throughout the community. This will ultimately address one area of social inequality that this community is struggling with. And Abbotsford, along with many other cities worldwide, are beginning to repurpose spaces to address the needs of their respective communities. One example of this is the University of the Fraser Valley. In the picture here, we can see they've allowed one of their parking lots in their Abbotsford campus to be repurposed as a COVID-19 testing facility. Having space for emergency facilities like this is just one component to a resilient city. And this is an example of how community, businesses, and local health authorities are coming together to make sure that our community will make it through the challenges at hand. And they're doing it in a sustainable way. This communicates that we really are in this together. Community artwork is another area that can play a big role in relaying messages to the public, and again, ultimately creates more resilient communities. This mural is located again in Abbotsford and was designed by a local artist to remind the community to support local businesses, and serves as another reminder that working together is the most effective way to move through times of crisis. So in conclusion, creating resilient communities is not an easy task. It's a very complicated one. But if previous pandemics have taught us anything, it's that we need to get citizens involved in creative design planning through the use of tactical urbanism strategies. Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody. This is a quote from Charles Montgomery's book, Happy City. And what I love about this quote is the message that the design of our cities should be inclusive of its citizens and the needs of the community as a whole. When cities are created by everybody, they can be resilient to even the worst crisis. And with that, I thank you for listening to this presentation. If you would like to learn more about creating resilient cities, or if you'd like to connect with me and my team, please visit my website, Facebook, or LinkedIn pages.